The Committee on Environment, Land, Agriculture, and Procurement Reform calls this public hearing to order. It is 1 p.m. on Friday, February 9th, 2018. Present with me today is Senator Frank Uggan. The purpose of this public hearing is to receive testimony on the executive appointment of Mr. Austin J. Duenas to serve as a member of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, to hear Bill number 83-34 COR introduced by Frank B. Uggan Jr., and to hear Bill number 222-34 COR introduced by Thomas C. Atta. Notice of this afternoon's public hearing was provided to senators, stakeholders, and the local media, as well as published in the Guam Daily Post on February 2nd, 5-day notice, and February 7th, meeting the 48-hour notice requirement, and thus the requirements of the open government law have been satisfied. The committee will continue to receive written testimony until 4 p.m. on Monday, February 12, 2018. Please address testimony to Senator Thomas C. Atta, Chairperson, Committee on Environment, Land, Agriculture, and Procurement Reform, and testimonies can be dropped off to the mailboxes here at the legislature or mailed to office@senatoratta.org. So we'll now begin with the executive appointment of Mr. Austin Duenas to serve as a member of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. Those who have signed up, so Mr. Borja, go ahead and step forward. And Mr. Duenas, you can go ahead and step forward also. So we'll start with Mr. Borja.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Senator Uggan. My name is Michael Borja. I serve as the Administrative Director for the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, and I am here to offer my support and recommendation for the approval of Mr. Austin Duenas as a member of the Chamorro Land Trust Board of Commissioners. Mr. Duenas will be fulfilling the 5th spot on the board, which has been vacant for quite a number of years, and with him coming on board, it will definitely assist the commission, who's recently has had some issues with obtaining quorums for our monthly meetings. Mr. Duenas is a young man who has agreed to and volunteered to serve on the commission. He understands the task. We've gone over quite a bit of the details of the Chamorro Land Trust, the rules and regs, the laws, and some of the challenges that we have moving forward in the commission, and the need for the commissioners to be well aware of all that's happening, and especially with the present lawsuit that's before the commission. He has served very well as he's gone through the University of Guam in extracurricular activities within student government at the university, and so he's a man who's coming forth, I believe, to really give his full effort to assist with the Chamorro Land Trust and in the challenges and in the issues that we have to deal with coming in the future. So I ask for this committee's support and for this body's approval of Mr. Duenas as a commissioner on the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Borja. Just to make sure we get the technicalities here, on the packet it shows that the term served is April 11, 2018 to April 10th, 2021. So you're saying that he's been appointed to a position that is currently vacant?
Right. We do have 4 sitting members right now.
Okay.
And so there is that 5th position that is vacant.
Okay. So because this is a staggered term
Correct.
board, then this appointment actually then becomes effective. I guess I'll have to check with legal counsel.
Yeah, we'll look at that as well on our side.
Yeah, to see whether if it was, we go into session in a couple of weeks. So does the term begin then, and then he has to come up for a reappointment on April 18th or sometime after that? So the law allows for him to serve beyond the, if the expiration date of the current term is April 10th, he's allowed to serve 90 days beyond that, plus 3 legislative days, so an additional 6 months. And you may then have to come back for a reappointment. That's, I'll have to check with our legal counsel,
Sure.
but that's the way it will probably work.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Senator, did you have any questions from Mr. Borja? Okay. Mr. Duenas.
Thank you. Half a day, Mr. Chairman, Senator Uggan. I would like to begin by thanking Governor Calvo for appointing me to continue serving the people of our island through the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. My name is Austin J. Duenas. I'm 28 years old and a native-born Chamorro. I am a graduate of Southern High School. I hold both a bachelor's degree in political science and philosophy from the University of Guam. Since I have graduated from college, I have served in both the private and public sectors, where I find helping people to be the most rewarding experience. I know that there are many challenges that our island faces, but I look to these as opportunities to help and make a difference. I pledge to fully commit myself to CLTC by working with my colleagues in addressing issues and concerns that the people of Guam have. Serving on CLTC would be a great honor. I will take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, have you taken the time to meet with some of the current members, in particular the chairperson of the commission?
I did speak with Mike Borja. We went over the different parts of CLTC as much as we could. However, I have not had a chance to meet with all of the members of the commission. No, sir.
Okay. Have you met with any of the commission members?
No, sir.
You haven't? Okay, fine. Have you had any, have you made any effort at all to kind of maybe dig out their minutes of previous meetings?
Yes, sir. So I did receive the minutes from the previous meetings. I did read through them. It was quite hefty, so I did my best to try and read through them as much as I could. But I do have minutes from some of the previous meetings, and I did read through them. Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Thanks, and I appreciate that. So, Senator?
Mr. Duenas, first of all, I just want to thank you very much for looking at possibly serving the community, people of Guam, in this particular capacity. And certainly it's noble to see individuals, especially the younger generation, stepping up and offering their services. No pun intended, I'm not going to be very frank with you. I do have serious reservations, not with you as an individual, but the position of the individual that the individual presently occupies and the board he or she will be sitting on. And I say this because there's another board of the government of Guam, the Guam Land Use Commission, in which an individual was sitting there who is an employee of the governor's office. And to me, there could conceivably be direct conflict of interest in terms of making decisions because of the influence of a phone call or the influence of a conversation, because that individual works in the governor's office. And in your case, you work in the lieutenant governor's office. That's why I need to qualify my statement, Mr. Duenas, that this really has nothing to do with you as an individual, but looking at the situation. Because that was a situation where I had serious questions about the decision that the board members made, the Guam Land Use Commission members made, and Mr. Borja is very familiar with this situation about a year ago, in which questions were raised about the influences or the potential conflicts and the favoritism the appearance of favoritism in terms of some of the decisions that are made. So I still have to put some thought into this. I really commend you for stepping up and offering your services and your assistance, but I do have some serious reservations in regards to anyone that's working in the government of Guam who could be directly influenced in making decisions that deal directly with such a critical board as the Chamorro Land Trust Commission or the Guam Land Use Commission or some of the other boards that they serve in. So I need to put additional thought into this, but thank you for appearing today, and thank you very much for your presentation.
I don't have any questions, any further questions, but we'll certainly work on reporting out this this confirmation hearing and try and get it on the agenda for the February 19th session. Thank you very much. Next on the agenda is bill number, I'm going to go ahead and exercise the chair's prerogative and go down to item number 3, bill number 222-34, simply because I really want to give ourselves as much time as possible to discuss Bill 83, and I believe that Bill 222 will probably be taken care of pretty quickly. So, okay? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and call up, we're going to go ahead and proceed next with the public hearing on bill number 222-34. And I'll call up Mr. Lee Weber and Mr. Mike Borja. And Bill 222 is an act to authorize the sale of a 394 square meter irregular remnant portion of the old Pili Agana road fronting lot 85-2 in the municipality of Piti. And this specifically is the area around where the MDA dive shop is located, correct? So I'm going to go ahead and start with Mr. Mike Borja, Director of Department of Land Management, and then Mr. Lee Weber.
Again, thank you very much and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Senator. My name is Michael Borja, the Director of the Department of Land Management. On Bill number 222-34, it seeks to authorize the sale of 394 square meters of an irregular remnant portion of the old Pili Agana Road fronting lot 85-2 in the municipality of Piti. The Department of Land Management has reviewed the bill and finds that the lot described in the bill has been parceled and is now described as lot 85-2-R1 as shown on survey map 039 FY85. And I've attached that to a copy of that map to this testimony. This lot is currently owned by the Micronesian Divers Association, Inc., and who is the intended purchaser of the portion of Old Pili Agana Road. The department doesn't concur with the bill's findings that lot 85-2R1 is landlocked by this easement because this lot contiguously borders the easement known as Old Pili Agana Road, which clearly provides ingress and egress to the lot. Furthermore, the semi-concrete building located on the lot has been grossly encroaching onto this easement since 1985, as evidenced in the reference map. Additionally, the warranty deed, instrument number 860252, which is Exhibit B, conveys this lot, which conveyed the lot to the Micronesian Divers Association, clearly states the encroachment of the concrete building onto this easement. The department's site inspection confirmed this encroachment as it's depicted on the 1985 survey map. Regarding the land use zoning of this area, the 1967 official zoning map called F367S43 depicts the area where lot 85-2R1 is located as M2 Heavy Industrial Zone. And I've included a copy of that very, very old zoning map as Exhibit C. Additionally, the easement is a substandard, unregistered Government of Guam property. The purchaser should be required to produce a land survey registration map and register the entire remnant of this old Pili Agana Road as shown in the survey map, and they need to do this through the Superior Court of Guam. All land registration expenses should be borne by the purchaser, although the department shall be available to assist with the land registration process. Following successful completion of this land registration, then that road can be subdivided in a new survey map to be completed by the purchaser. We highly recommend that the owners of both lot 85-2R1 and the other lot 85-2-1 should then be authorized to purchase those portions of the immediately adjacent, to their respective lots. Because this encroachment onto the easement was documented since 1985 and the property used without authorization by a for-profit business entity, the department believes that this should be compensated. However, without any formal process to determine this lost compensation, we suggest the following: that the purchaser obtain the three appraisals of the desired property at their cost from three separate appraisal companies qualified to do business on Guam and appraised at M2 zone. The Department of Land Management will select two of those appraisers, and the sale price should be determined as the greatest of the three appraisals. With a correction to the lot description and the inclusion of the conditions described in this letter, the department supports Bill 222-34. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Borja. Mr. Weber?
Mr. Chairman, Senators, thank you for the opportunity to be here and for the opportunity to hopefully finally add this little sliver back into the lot that exists and make the lot actually totally functional. We appreciate the time and the effort that's gone into this, and we hope that we can actually bring it to a functional conclusion. We have no problem with the requirements that Mr. Bars brought up. We can arrange for the appraisals, and he selects two and we select one, and we can move it forward as expediently as possible. Right now, I know the line runs kind of halfway through my office and out the other side of the building, and so I really hope to be able to solidify this and make it functional.
Okay, fine, thank you. I want to recognize the presence of the Vice Speaker, Therese Serlahi. Senator Uggan, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Weber, I guess my question is first of all, you more or less agreed with some of the suggestions by the Director of Land Management that purchase three appraisals, of which Land Management will select two of those appraisers, and then the sale price will be determined as the greatest of the three appraisals. There was another item that the Director had mentioned with regards to compensation for prior usage of the property. My understanding is that you purchased a property many years ago, but it was previously owned
Yes.
by another individual or another
Right.
business. So in this particular case, any comments you would like to provide with regards to that point that was brought up by the Director?
If that's something that in the end must be dealt with, I think that the previous owner should take care of their portion and we take care of ours, if that's a requirement in the end. I don't know how you ascertain that, quite frankly, but you know, I'm amenable to working with anybody on making it work. I'd just like to make the lot more functional than it is right now.
And I really appreciate your response, and I think that by virtue of accepting the greatest of the highest of the three appraisals, that perhaps would be an approach to try to address that concern that was raised by the Director, rather than looking at going backwards, because you're trying to rectify a situation where, in fact, this parcel sliver of property was previously under the previous owner, that it was under the understanding that they had owned it, and in fact,
Right.
it's not recorded that way. So I appreciate your statements, and Mr. Director, thank you very much for your comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I guess if I could just make very clear, so Director, when you recommended that that the prior use should be compensated, you're saying that the following suggestions are in lieu of that compensation, or that this would be the compensation? Is
Right.
purchased at an appraisal value?
Well, we don't have any way of determining what that compensation should be, nor do I think that there's any precedent for us to do that going back, unless it's authorized some way by this legislature. So without any formulas or any kind of guidance to determine that, we just suggest that in the process we take the highest of the appraised values and as opposed to the average of the appraised values.
Are you going to, so DLM selects two of the appraisers? Okay.
Correct.
All right. Well, for any purchase, we would have to use appraised value. So that doesn't really address any part of the past use. So we're just going to forego that.
Correct, because I don't have, unless, like I said, you mandated through some kind of authorization to come up with some formula to determine that, I don't have any way for going backwards to try to figure an amount that should be compensated.
Does this sliver impact any other landowners?
Pardon me?
Does this sliver impact any other landowners? Not. Okay.
Well, this sliver of the old easement also abuts an adjoining lot. So it's not just the lot that MDA is looking at, but the owner of the other lot should probably have the opportunity, once this land is registered and subdivided out, to also purchase that portion that he has, because it still has no use. This land actually touches and abuts 3 different properties. 2 of them are the one that MDA has, and the other property, and I would guess it's probably no more than 10 square meters is on the 3rd one. So it's really an insignificant portion. Doesn't do any favor to that landowner to even make an attempt to get it. But for the other 2 landowners, MDA and the neighboring property, they both have probably about equal amount of that.
Who is that other?
I'd have to look it back up. I did look it up, but I don't have that information with me. But we, just looking at the latest title information, I was able to figure. We were able to determine who it was. It's a company. It's not an individual.
All right. Does this would this impact? I'm sorry. I'm trying to rush look at the maps, but would this impact any of the traditional use of that area by the public? Not.
No, the traditional use going all the way back to 1967, it was actually M2 because there were junkyards, gas producing businesses. That's why it was given that zoning back in the old day. And I don't know, I think some of us can remember that I think the location where MDA was at was a mobile gas station, yes, where everyone all kind of wondered how long, when that rock would fall on top of it.
Yeah, there's a huge rock, and the geological testing actually shows that it goes way down into the hill, but it's really ominous. After a storm, there's a rock the size of this room hanging over the building.
But it's secure.
But it's secure. So.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just to be clear, the adjacent, the private lots in the area are adjacent to each other, correct? As opposed to normally when we're dealing with issues like this, the private lots are across from each other from the government property, such that then arrangements have to be made that, the property owner on this side will be allowed to purchase half of that, and then the property owner on the other side. But in this case, we're talking about property owners that are side by side, basically.
Correct.
Okay, fine. I don't have any further questions, unless you have any. None? Okay, fine. We'll consider then Bill 222-34 as having been duly heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your time and your effort.
Okay. All right, now we'll go to Bill 83-34 COR, introduced by Senator Frank Uggan. And Senator, if you would go ahead and introduce the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to read from captions of the legislation. This is for those who are watching. Bill number 83-34 COR. And the title is to authorize the Guam Environmental Protection Agency to procure the services of a qualified respondent or respondents for the proper disposal of green waste resulting from post-typhoon cleanup and village beautification efforts. Mr. Chairman, this legislation was introduced back in April of last year, and at that time there were some serious concerns raised with regards to green waste sitting around in different parts of the island community, primarily because some of the mayors at that time did not have, and still don't, have the financial resources and the means to be able to properly dispose of the green waste. And one of the challenges that was brought up was that the green waste that are deposited in any area within the villages, or were in the villages when the bill was introduced, that it was really a breeding ground for some of the invasive species such as rhinoceros beetle as well as the little fire ant. And that created a serious concern with the community. What this legislation does, Mr. Chairman, also in conjunction with that, it not only recognizes the Guam Environmental Protection Agency as the lead entity to be able to assist in the coordination of the disposition of green waste on our island, but it provides, or it would establish qualifications for qualified respondents. And some of those aspects, if I can just highlight, for a qualified respondent, they must be a permitted green waste facility, must have a full-time certified compost manager, must also demonstrate that they have the appropriate equipment so that they can dispose of green waste in our community, and then also must have recycled or repurposed some of the green waste within a time frame of 1 year prior to the enactment of this legislation. And another component, Mr. Chairman, is that there were also challenges recognized at that time. And perhaps the environment now is somewhat more challenging, but it also recognizes that if the government is not able to pay the appropriate respondents or green waste company, then tax credit could be an alternative in terms of the form of payment. And it's very important that something similar to this, that flexibility is provided, because if in fact there's another, God forbid, another major storm or major typhoon, and we are being reimbursed by federal funds through FEMA, then certainly going this route would be appropriate, because there can always be that trade-off in terms of compensating the company or allowing the government to be able to use tax credits. Mr. Chairman, one further item is that the funding source, if in fact there are any excess within the recycling revolving fund, that would also be a source of funding to be able to compensate the disposition of any of the green waste. So that's the summary of the proposed legislation. If the question is posed, do we still need it today? Absolutely. I believe that the government always should have an option to dispose of green waste, especially when we're dealing with working with the mayors, cleaning up their villages, working with households and residents out in the community. And this is a mechanism that could conceivably work into the future in terms of ensuring that we have the proper disposition of green waste. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having the public hearing on this measure.
Thank you very much. Signing up to provide testimony is Mr. Walter Leon Guerrero, Administrator for Guam Environmental Protection Agency, Mr. Michael Limtiaco with Pacific Unlimited, Inc. I noticed that Dr. Russell Campbell is here, who's also in charge of the Invasive Species Division, Guam Agriculture, expressing that you're in favor. But did you want to provide any oral testimony and add to the discussion? Sure. Well, I'm sure you can speak on it just very well. And then I have Mr. John Limtiaco, also from Pacific Unlimited, in favor of the project, and I welcome you to join at the table if you want. But we'll go ahead and we'll start with Mr. Walter Leon Guerrero.
Thank you, Vice Speaker Talahi, Senator Adat, and Senator Again. My name is Walter S. Leon Guerrero. I am the Administrator at Guam EPA. I've read this bill, Senator Again, and one of the things I'd like to start off with is the recycling revolving fund in general. So the law, the statutes requires that Guam EPA put together regulations on how to spend the RRF. I have a copy of our latest draft, which the good Senator Adat also had some time to review our previous draft, and we made some amendments to it. So for me, the biggest thing, and I'm going to speak pretty frankly, sirs and ma'am, is a lot of my staff time with this RRF is being addressed to how to spend it, and quite honestly, it's almost like battles with the legislature, because a lot of different senators want to use this fund to fund different aspects. And so I'd say within the last year and a half, I've seen 4 proposed bills and had to have staff talk about it on how to spend the RRF, where the law already states that we should write the regulations on how the money should be spent. And so I'm just in a request for the senators is, please, if you guys can get together and figure out how you guys really want to spend this money. Our draft regs will be submitted and hopefully would be passed, and then the NEC gives the authority for us at how to spend the money. And then that way, hopefully that'll be done. My biggest fear is because this is a fund that constantly gets money in because it's through the registration of vehicles, that everyone's going to want a piece of it. And I really think to be efficient, we need to either let Guam EPA do the job by the statutes of the law and decide how the money is to be spent and whether to be approved by you guys or disapproved. But let us work that and let's get there. Now, with that being said, Senator Uggan, this provision about having some of the RRF, that is a provision in our draft regs that allows us to do that post-typhoon. So we kind of have that built into what we have. So I'm not opposed to this bill. There are some things I would like to work with you to tighten up on some of the issues. One of them, and since Dr. Campbell's here, I'm not going to go too much into detail, but working with current green waste piles, there are mechanisms that must be checked to ensure that your invasive species aren't there. And if it is the little fire ant, then you do not want to move any of these green piles until that is removed. And that again, I'll let Dr. Campbell talk about that. The tax credit portion. Our agency is a technical agency on oversight of environmental regulations. Tax credits, I wouldn't know what to say about what tax credits are worth dollar to dollar. I don't do economics, I'm sorry. So if you're saying Guam EPA has the ability to issue tax credits, we would still need someone to tell us how to do that, what to do, because we do not have that within our staffing pattern. And maybe it's an easy thing. Maybe I just never looked into it. But I don't want to say me and my staff is going to do tax credits when we've never ever done that in the past. Again, I don't want to promise or agree to something that I don't know if we can actually do that function. And so maybe you add in another agency that does tax credits to coordinate with us. That's a simple fix. That's fine. Pretty much that's it at this point. I'll be submitting written comments, but I just wanted to let you guys know this is not a bad bill, but it is built into our draft regs currently, and I can leave a copy with you today, and or we can send you an electronic copy so that you guys can see everything that we've put together and what it is. Our draft regs are not built, they're not written that everything can be implemented per fiscal year. The way it's built is because it's supposed to be what Guam EPA is allowed to spend. We put in numerous ones. So like, for instance, if our draft regs, if you were to try add up everything, it'd be, over $3 million a year being spent. We do not have that in the account per year coming in. So what it is gives us options to look at and what is most required at the time. So say we had, heaven forbid, like you said, Senator, a typhoon. If the regs are in place, we can almost use the entire thing for green waste post-typhoon. But we don't, there are limits, but then we can also change and use the limits accordingly, and we can change the draft regs in that manner. But overall, it's a good idea. We kind of put it in the same, so to me, it doesn't matter if it's through this bill that the post-typhoon is or through our regs. But my big plea to the legislature is if you guys keep on taxing, so to speak, this fund, then maybe we need to relook at the law for this fund, because It's almost like I feel like staff is wasting money working on this when we keep having to fight, not fight, but, you know, come and justify what the money should be spent on. So, thank you, Senators.
So after all is said and done,
Yes.
can I then conclude that EPA views Bill 83-34 as being consistent with how EPA would like to see the recycling fund used in the event that this has to be put into action?
A portion of it, yes. You could say that, sir.
And insofar as the tax credits are concerned, of course, that's out of EPA's
Right.
realm, but you do bring up a good point, and I think we probably need to address in here how those tax credits would be applied for. But otherwise, the recycling fund would be a source of funding, and EPA supports the concept of the bill.
And again, we support that concept because it's also in our draft regs, correct?
All right, fine. Mr. Senator Mtiwako?
Hi. Good afternoon, Chairman Atta, Vice Speaker Terlahi, and Senator Uggan. My name is Michael Mtiwako. I'm the Vice President of Pacific Unlimited. PUI has several business entities, one of which does business as Pacific Topsoils and Compost. PUI started Pacific Topsoils and Compost in response to a decision by the Guam Solid Waste Management Authority to no longer allow for the tipping of recyclable materials such as green waste and wood waste. And I know that that was in an effort for the Luzon landfill to sustain the life of the cells, as well as to pursue a culture of recycling those materials that could be recycled. Our company decided to invest in and pursue accepting and recycling green waste and wood waste more than 6 years ago. And from the green waste and wood waste that would otherwise have been disposed of in the landfill, we produce compost, mulch, raw and colored wood chips, playground mulch, erosion control socks, and engineered soils. We sell our products to farmers, gardeners, landscapers, hotels, golf courses, to Department of Agriculture and UOG, to name a few. However, this industry is in its infancy. Like we said, we started 6 years ago. Compost hadn't been produced on Guam before. Wood hadn't been recycled into mulch before. So we still have to charge a tipping fee for those that bring their wood waste and green waste to our facility to help subsidize all the work that it takes to get it into a recycled material, such as compost or wood mulch. Bill 83-34 helps push the industry in the right direction. GovGuam is a major producer of green waste, just in the the fact that they have to manage the vegetative growth in the easements, power lines, roadways. And Bill 83-34 allows for a vehicle to address how they go about disposing it, how it's going to be paid for. The responsibility of managing the vegetative growth for these easements, and as well as the impact of GovGuam's purchasing power, right? All the items that they purchase and ship, they come in on wood pallets. There really is no alternate use for these wood pallets after they come to Guam. There's not a big export industry on Guam. So these pallets, they basically just rot or get thrown away. However, they can be repurposed into wood mulch. Currently, our company under contract recycles 100% of the Andersen Air Force Base and Naval Base wood pallet waste. We turn that into wood mulch. We color it. We leave it, raw in its raw state, and we sell that product for vegetative growth management for the most part, as well as just landscaping beautification. And it's something that maybe Guam wants, the government wants to pursue. We have a lot of, during our rainy season, the grass grows, very well, and mulch can be used to help subdue that growth of grass. So it could be another cost benefit for GovGuam if we can create an industry that can utilize these materials. Once we create an industry that can utilize all these recycled materials, we can bring those tipping fees down, and it can cost the government less. It can cost residents less, as well as commercial operators less, to dispose, or I should say recycle, their green waste and wood waste. And 83-34 provides the vehicle as well as the potential funding sources to assist the government in doing so. EPA regulations to properly dispose of or recycle all items apply to everyone, including GovGuam. And GovGuam really should set the example of how to manage and recycle green waste and wood waste. We cannot just stockpile it and just wait for a solution. We need to have a way to manage it, and I think Bill 83-34 provides that. We can't just take a backhoe and clear the easements and just push it into the jungle. That doesn't work either. It just provides a habitat for rotting green waste, and that provides a habitat for the coconut rhinoceros beetle to lay their larvae in. It's cool. It provides a food source for the larvae, whereas if you take that green waste and you take it to an active composting facility, right? A company that can actively compost, meaning that they can properly shred it, they can monitor it, they can bring that compost to temperature. The compost basically can produce enough heat from the microbes and the beneficial bacteria to let nature do its thing, that the composting process results in this heat generation of up to 150 degrees. And that is not a habitat that the coconut rhinoceros beetle likes to live in. So there's this big question as to, well, do composting facilities actually attract the coconut rhinoceros beetles? And the answer is, if it's a passive one and it's not managed correctly and it doesn't generate the heat, yes. Just like rotting green waste would if you just pushed it into the jungle or you dumped it in a landfill, right? But if you take it to an active composter, that heat generation, the larvae just cannot live in that type of heat. It's very uninhabitable for any type of species, even seeds. At that temperature, you kill the seeds and they can't germinate weeds. So if you come up to a properly managed compost facility, you won't see any growth on their compost piles because of all of those seeds have now been basically rendered useless because the heat process. We do have some recommendations for the bill, and some of which Walter here, kind of hit on regarding green waste. And there's going to be certain periods of time where the green waste, it's not conducive to bringing to a compost facility because it has these invasive species, and EPA regulates the transport of invasive species throughout the island, right? You just can't move it. So, one of the recommendations would potentially be to incorporate the use of the air curtain burners into managing the green waste. If you are facing issues with invasive species, you might want to just manage that problem at its source. Air curtain burners can help manage the green waste by doing that. By basically putting it through a air curtain burner, you're going to kill off the invasive species present, and you're going to stay in compliance with EPA by not transporting those invasive species over the roadways. One recommendation that we have for the bill is that it should specifically require, under the qualifications of respondents, that the composting be active. So the difference between the two is a passive composting facility basically just stockpiles green waste and just lets nature do its thing, right? Just over time, eventually that product is going to compost naturally and turn into compost. A active composting facility actually incorporates shredding and grinding equipment. It monitors the temperatures of the pile. It adds moisture when the moisture is needed in order for the microbes to have what it needs in order to compost. And you have to properly turn it because the heat can build up. And if you don't manage that heat, you can have some spontaneous combustion. It can cause fire hazards. So an active composting facility will do those things. And by doing those things, you actually compost much faster than you would on a passive composting. So the qualification for respondents should let's see. Another recommendation would be the timeliness in which the green waste is generated and it getting to the compost facility is critical. You don't want to have the green waste sit and become what they call brown waste. The moisture in that product basically dehydrates, and it doesn't compost as well as freshly cut green waste. So I'm not sure how it could be incorporated into the bill, but if it's moved to a composting facility within a couple of days, one, you prevent it having a habitat for invasive species, but two, once you start shredding and grinding it, the moisture that's currently in that green waste really helps to jumpstart the composting process and gets it to heat faster. Another recommendation would be, as far as an alternative funding source, I know that the bill addresses the revolving recycling fund, tax credits, but we may want to consider the invasive species fund too. The bill discusses invasive species. It's a way to help mitigate the increase or the promulgation of invasive species. So having that as an alternative funding source in the bill could be an alternative. And then just some minor grammatical things that we saw were on page 2, line 5. I believe the bill meant to address respondents, plural, and trammel screen is spelled with an O. I think it addresses trammel with an A. But that's our testimony. We do support the bill. We thank the legislature for addressing the issue. And in closing, one of the things that we wanted to say is that if we wait until we have to manage it, like we've done with the air curtain burner, the cost of operating an air curtain burner is several times more expensive than just properly disposing of it via composting. So the money that could have been spent to just properly compost that green waste could have taken the government's finances farther in addressing the issue than using an air curtain burner in those scenarios where you could use an air curtain, where you could use composting as a solution.
Thank you very much. Dr. Campbell?
Thank you, Chair, for asking me to provide comments, and Senator Uggan and Vice Speaker. I think really, we've been looking at the green waste problem in the last several months in the Department of Agriculture and in the Biosecurity Division in particular. Of course, we've been looking from the perspective of invasive species, but it seems to me that we need to look holistically as an overall system here, because, and as was mentioned by the Senator here, I think there could be cost savings if you have a system which controls the green waste from the point of its generation all the way through to the point of its ultimate, how it's dealt with ultimately. And from a scientific standpoint, we feel that that should definitely be composting to produce a product that can be turned back into the environment to enrich the soil, or to serve as mulch to help preserve moisture and for plants, and to prevent erosion. So I think the Invasive Species Council actually has, within the law that created it several years ago, the ability to more forcefully regulate the generation of green waste, at least by government agencies. And so far, the council hasn't really exercised that authority, but hopefully we hope that it will be able to do so in the future. So you have a lot of some of the government agencies, particularly those that have lands under their control, which generate green waste all the time. And in the past, sometimes those green wastes are disposed of properly, and sometimes they're not. So we would like to see, a more uniform system whereby green waste is definitely moved to where it could be composted soon, right away if possible. That is the most cost-effective thing, and it also generates compost and mulch which can be used, as I mentioned. Now, one of the things that was mentioned also is the problem of if we were to have another typhoon, the green waste problem then is magnified probably 100-fold. And one of the things that I think has been left out of this discussion so far is what do you do with that? There needs to be set up greenway staging sites in Guam for that eventuality. And if one of the things in the past of trying to get funding from FEMA after a typhoon is that they have certain requirements that there has to be set aside areas that are fenced, gated, and that's where the green waste would be taken to. And otherwise, they won't they won't reimburse funding to the government agencies for the management or for the movement of the green waste generated by a typhoon. So that's another thing that needs to be taken into account, is that the government needs to set aside land areas and then provide funding for the fencing and gating of these areas so that the green waste, massive amounts of green waste that we would have after a typhoon, we'd have some place to take it, and then we could actually, the government of Guam could avail itself of federal reimbursements after a typhoon. So we have set up, the council, the Invasive Species Council, has set up a committee which has started, it's only had one meeting so far, started to look at an overall green waste management program for Guam. I think this bill is a step forward, or it could be a step forward, to at least possibly have a recycling fund involved here, but there may be other funding sources that are needed. I'm not sure. I don't know anything about the recycling fund, where it gets its money from, or how much, or anything about it. But obviously, if you're taking green waste and you're composting it, you're recycling it, and you're recycling it into something very beneficial. So I think that's a good step forward. That's why I indicated that I would be in favor of this bill, but I think the bill needs to be a little bit more inclusive about some of the other things that we need to institute an overall green waste management system, and not just for normal times such as we've had lately, but also if there's another typhoon, that also needs to be thought about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Urgan, did you have any questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you for having the hearing on this legislation. You know, when I was anticipating the public hearing, I didn't realize I was going to get an extensive lesson on the composting process and the requirements, and certainly some of the rules and regs that we anticipate to review very shortly. So I really appreciate all of the comments and testimonies provided. Mr. Chairman, just for the information of our members here, when this legislation was being proffered, we did reach out to the mayors and spoke to a number of mayors with regards to the challenges that they face with green waste and the disposition of green waste. We did reach out to several individuals who are environmentally and have been known to be environmentally conscious to see if we could get their feedback. And Senator Limtiaco did mention that his company has been in existence for over 6 years. So we did seek some comments and some perspectives also from representatives from Senator Limtiaco's company, just so that we clear everything in terms of understanding where some of these ideas originated from. And it really hits at the heart of the message, underlying message that the three of you sent here today in regards to this legislation, is that the disposition of green waste has got to be conducted in a way where, in fact, it's done correctly, and it prevents the breeding of invasive species, whether it's rhino beetle or the fire ants, and we certainly have to address it. And Doc, you did mention about after a storm, we need a centralized location so that, in fact, eventually we can dispose of the green waste, and those are all excellent ideas. I appreciate it. I just want to share, when this legislation was going to be introduced, there were a couple of questions that was posed to the president of the Mayor's Council. And I want to just share just two of the questions that were posed and the responses, because it also reinforces the need to be able to have the government of Guam to have a flexible approach to disposing of green waste. One of the questions, Mr. Chairman, was how many villages have green waste? And the response was all 19 districts have green waste that they are not able to dispose of. Mayors do not have anywhere to put the waste, and they have no way to dispose of it. They are also trying to avoid fueling invasive species and other hazardous problems that is caused by improper disposal. it also costs too much to bring it to commercial companies that dispose waste. The other question that was also posed to the president of the Mayor's Council is, how long does the waste sit? The response was, there's no way for the mayors to dispose of it because of the amount of money that it costs to go to commercial companies. So to avoid having more waste sit in the villages, the mayors advised the residents to get rid of the green waste themselves. So that is really reflective of what happens out there in our villages in terms of the mayors trying to deal with green waste, and then also our residents also trying to address that. So I appreciate your testimony, your comments, and Mr. Chairman, I certainly look forward to the evolution of this legislation and then hopefully entertaining it in session floor someday soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Vice Speaker?
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your testimony. I did have a couple questions. I'm very glad to have a conversation again, or this discussion formally regarding a plan for the government of Guam for green waste and brown waste, I guess, and I'm also learning like the rest of the panel. So first of all, I'm curious about the rules and regs, Director. So if the rules and regs, what is your timeline? When do you expect to transmit those?
So we plan a final meeting next week internally. Again, we reach out to certain entities, like our board, Senator Ada, and a couple other people, just to get a feel of what they think of what our initial draft, or probably our 7th draft was. And so we got that, we've amended it, and we're going to try to get it finalized, at least in draft form, to be presented to the legislature by next week, we hope.
Have you had public hearings on it?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay.
Again, this is just to...
So you're just kind of beginning on that.
Right.
All right.
Yes. So, if you don't mind, so one of the things is why we feel that we're not rushing it right now is because there's current law that has been passed, that 2.2 million is already in the Mayor's Council to green waste for this fiscal year. And so that's why, even if we were to pass the reg, or get you guys to go through the whole process and the regs were to be passed, it couldn't be implemented until the earliest next fiscal year, because there's a law using the money already identified to use the money for this year. So that gave us some room to, okay, let's really address this and try to make sure we have everything possible, which, when we submit it to you guys, hopefully you also agree to it. But more eyes the better. I always agree to that. Thank you.
Okay, yes, so you're right. The current use of 2.1 million of the recycling revolving fund goes to the Mayor's Council for executing the island-wide environmental cleanup program. Would you say that program's consistent with this green waste?
That program is a very, very general program. So what the MOU, which I have a copy of here, that's been signed by all entities, so it's in effect. It's just one of the conditions is that the Mayor's Council has to come up and inform and get concurrence with Guam EPA on the procedures that they're going to use and the efforts they're going to use the money for.
Okay, and then my other question is, so in the statute creating that recycling revolving fund, they list the uses and the priorities, and I don't know if I'm reading it wrong, but I don't see green waste in here at all. Is that your reading also? I see first priority junk vehicles, tires, batteries, waste oil, white goods, appliances. Second priority paper, cardboard, plastic, and glass. Third priority is other recyclable materials as determined by the administrator, or is it included in that category?
That's correct. It's included as other recyclable materials.
I see.
And so that's why, again, as stated earlier, our regs have a wide berth of options to spend the money on. Correct.
Okay, so use of the recycling revolving fund, in your opinion, for this purpose is consistent with the law and your regulations, your draft regulations?
Correct.
All right. Do you think when you distinguish between green waste and brown waste then that this law would take care of, for example, in the findings that we talked about Oka Point, wouldn't that be brown waste by now?
Both can still be composted, but the sooner you get it composting when it's green, the more beneficial it is. The moisture is the determining factor. So, you know, the more moisture it has when you shred it and grind it and incorporate it into the compost pile, the faster it gets to heat.
So that's ideal, but you could still take
You can still do
take
the
care
brown
of
waste.
older waste.
Yes.
Okay. And what about just a couple other things in the bill? And thank you for your input and suggestions for this bill. Do you think, well, some of the criteria, it's saying that EPA is going to look for a respondent who meets these criteria. And do you have a comment on the criteria? Do you think all of these are required or necessary? I know he suggested active and a couple other suggestions. Active composting versus passive composting. But what about the minimum of 1 year prior waste experience?
I think I understand the intent. The intent is to make sure you're going with someone that is respected and knows what they're doing. That's not necessarily our call. I mean, that would be the call with the legislature. We have our current rules and regulations that require permitting, and that's where we oversee. So to ask me, is it fair for if the intent is that you want to see if they are certified and operable and they follow the rules and regulations, then I don't see that as a problem. But again, that's not a Guam EPA call.
Have you ever issued a solicitation for this type of service before?
No, and that was the other thing that it will be in the written comments. It's as a regulatory agency, it's a fine line for us to identify some of the companies that we permit to do work. It can be done. It's almost to the point where maybe there's another agency that should be overseeing it, because us as being the environmental regulators, maybe we shouldn't be also a payer and have one of the companies we oversee be our customer.
I see. So you have to permit this type of company.
Correct.
And all right. What about going through the mayors? Do you think that's efficient to have it divvied up by village, or you think it should be one island-wide central procurement type system?
That's a tricky question to ask me. And one of the best answers I could give you is, because the current law for budget law for this fiscal year, and we signed into an agreement, the MOU, and now they have the 2.1 or 2.2, I think it's like almost 2.2 million. So I would suggest that we watch what happens this year, and we could get a better gauge of how the mayors will use this money. Because currently they have this money at their disposal. Of course, they have, in the MOU, they have to come to get concurrence with Guam EPA. But someone may be better answer that after this fiscal year expires.
All right, and one more question for Senator Lim-Tiaco. Does composting have to be done I mean, is there any possibility that it be done like on site if we're talking about government property? Mm-hmm. Or you're saying it should be taken away and done where you have other types of equipment?
Yeah, it's going to be cost prohibitive to manage multiple small composting facilities throughout the island, having to mobilize equipment to and from. So from a cost perspective, you'll want to centralize it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And it should also be noted too that the legislature in helping grow this industry, right? You're going to be not just composting, but the recycling all wood waste products, for example, right? You're gonna and including composting, you're going to have the ability to then take a look at those imports that we bring in that are already produced here.
Yes.
Are those items that we're importing, such as potting soil, topsoil, wood chips?
Yes.
Do they have invasive species in them? How did we get the coconut rhinoceros beetle in the first place? How did we get the little fire ant? So these are going to put you in a position to potentially regulate those imports to try and prevent invasive species from entering the island via those methods already, right? So, the helping grow that industry would only improve or prevent more invasive species. Yeah.
Thank you. And Dr. Campbell, do you think that the Invasive Species Fund, can't remember the formal name of it, that fund is already, that this is one of the allowed purposes for that fund already, or not?
I don't think it should be used as a primary funding source for the management of green waste. I think it should be used for the management of invasive species. Now, those two things sometimes intersect, and there may be certain instances where what we do in the biosecurity division in trying to handle invasive species will intersect with the management of green waste. And in particular, I can point to the little fire ant. That's the concern that I brought up about moving piles of green waste around, is that they need to be checked first to see if they are infested with little fire ants, or otherwise you're just throwing it on the back of a truck and hauling it around, and then you could be spreading the little fire ants around. So there are certain instances where the concerns over invasives intersect with the concerns of management of green waste. But there are also ways of dealing with this. For example, we are now, have been just last week surveying the piles in the various villages to see which ones are infested with little fire ants and which ones are not. And it is my hope that we can, in small piles at least, we can go in and treat those piles and remove the threat of spreading the little fire ants. And then we could take those little piles and move them to a consolidation site, and then it could be dealt with there, so that we would eliminate the risk of spreading the little fire ants before we move the green waste. And so there are ways of dealing with these things and perhaps preventing the spread of invasive species. Each situation has to be looked at.
Chair, if I could just ask one more question of EPA. Do we have many sites currently that are like kind of what the bill intends to take care of, or this is kind of for the future?
So I think the last hearing I was at was the use of air curtain burners, and the reason why is to help eliminate the green and brown waste for so it wouldn't harbor the invasive species. So we've reduced, and I don't have the numbers with me, but based on what Department of Agriculture's contract, we have the number of cubic yards of green waste and brown waste that was disposed of through the air curtain burner system, and we can provide that to the legislature. Ultimately, Guam EPA's hope for green waste is to be compost. Much like Senator Limpiaco indicated, if we continue to burn them, then we're wasting a resource. Our goal and our dream is that all of Guam composts correctly, which is, actively composting, as Senator Limpiaco indicated, and turn our green waste into soil. To me, it's a travesty. Great business for Home Depot and Kmart that they sell all this soil, but why are we buying soil from elsewhere when we're such a lush island? And if we treat our green waste properly, we can have our soil made on home. And that is our goal at Guam EPA, and that's part of our zero waste plan that we're developing now. So there are still piles that are accumulating. When we went through the process of determining what piles or where the piles are, the mayors would say, well, we got a pile, but we're not going to tell you because we don't want you to give us the NOV for illegally storing green waste. And it's like, well, you need to tell us so we can try to help the situation. So there is a problem. I can't give an exact number because people don't want me to know, so I don't send out the guys to go get them, which is not what our intention is at all. Though it is within our authority to do that, we're trying to fix the problem. We don't want to be a continuous problem for the island. We want to be helpers to correct the problems that are here.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, so much for your testimony today. Thank you, Senator Limtiaco. I also learned a little bit while I was listening to you about composting and the temperature that green waste needs to be to not create a sustainable environment for some of these invasive species. And then in the questioning back and forth from the Vice Speaker and your input, Dr. Campbell, I also had the question about transporting. And so she talked about multiple sites, and you had responded that it would be difficult to conduct multiple sites, and that it would be more cost beneficial for us to have one site. So in the transporting, I'm also concerned that maybe there might be invasive species in the green waste that you're trying to take care of. So I just wanted to know what mechanism you have to transport this, and if you've kind of thought about, I'm not sure.
Yeah, in reference to Vice Speaker Terlahi's question is, if you were going to attempt to manage composting sites throughout the island, you'd have to go through EPA to get permitted to do so. So you would have to apply for permitting for every site. You would have to have equipment on site, or you would mobilize equipment from site to site, and that could become very cost prohibitive. Like I referenced earlier, we still charge a tipping fee to process green waste because of the expense involved in the equipment. We feel that the current rates are still pretty competitive when you look at national statistics and you look at what other places in the country charge. But the more green waste volume that we get, the lower those tipping fees can be. But to answer your question regarding transport, we don't actually transport the green waste. We rely on commercial haulers or individual residents or the mayors to bring the product to us. If it has coconut rhinoceros beetle, and we're almost positive over the last 6 years that green waste that have been brought to us already have coconut rhinoceros beetle in it, once we get it through the shredder and once we get it into the stockpile, the larvae is basically killed from the heat. So from the CRB perspective, we've been in operation for 6 years. There's no signs of coconut rhinoceros beetles in our stockpiles, just because of the heat. We don't have the little fire ant at our facility either, but you know, if the little fire ant was present in product that was brought to our facility, I'm not quite sure whether if they were too hot in the stockpile, they would just basically kind of crawl out and go somewhere else. But I don't know if the commercial haulers test for that before they pick it up or not. So I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah, I'm just concerned that from getting to point A to point B, I'm not sure how it's transported either. So maybe we can find out more information about that. My last question is about, it's on page 2 of the bill, section 4, the funding sources. So I just wanted to ask all of you, the bill states that Guam EPA can request that the governor issue tax credits to be used to pay for this mandate. Does anybody have any concerns with this potential funding source?
I think this bill was introduced prior to the Trump Tax Reform Act. So I can see how that can be a concern for the legislature regarding revenues. But you have to have a funding source. As Walter Erdy alluded to, the government of Guam is not properly disposing of their green waste already. And I think based on the questions that Senator Uggan proffered to the mayors, it's because they feel it's too expensive, right? So you have to have a funding source for it. So if it cannot be done through the Invasive Species Act, or we cannot tap into the revolving recycling fund, you need to have alternatives. So I would say that you need to weigh the costs and the benefits, right? You have seen what the coconut rhinoceros beetle, the damage it's done to our island. Our island relies on tourism. So, you know, does managing this problem, is that a benefit for our tourism industry? I would say it is. So I would think that tax credits are a potential funding source, and they should be included.
Mr. Leon Guerrero?
So earlier, I think maybe before you came in, I made the statement that I don't have a problem with the green waste being are utilizing the revolving recycling fund. In fact, it's in our agency's draft regs that are supposed to be the total outline of how we can spend the RRF. But I did mention earlier was that being an environmentalist and oversight regulatory agency, and I don't think many, if any, of my staff is capable of doing tax credits. I mean, I mentioned, I don't know if a tax credit is a cent for cent or dollar for dollar, so that is totally out of our realm. And if you wanted to incorporate tax credits, then you would have to assign someone or a different agency to help Guam EPA, because you don't want us doing tax credits because we'd mess it up big time. So, you know, just that's not within our realm of our job. So that's where I would have a concern, not necessarily the idea of tax credits, but staffing on Guam EPA would not know how to do it or set it up.
Okay, well, I thank you all so much for your input and for participating in this process, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions. First of all, what this bill actually does is it just authorizes EPA to, in a post-typhoon scenario, to procure the services of qualified respondent to basically separate and dispose of. So it's kind of like a contingency measure in case of, you know, a typhoon occurs, right? Now, is it EPA right now that permits entities that want to basically have a green waste collection operation?
That is correct, sir.
And what are the criteria? Do you have basically established criteria as to what must be met in order to be licensed? Does it even include some of the criteria that's mentioned in Section 3?
Actually, Section 3 is more extensive criteria than we currently require.
Can you send to the committee a copy of the criteria that is currently used for an applicant that would have to meet, and that the applicant will have to meet in order to be given a permit?
For specifically composting of green waste?
Yes.
Or just, because green waste, again, as mentioned earlier, you can do the composting, which is our ultimate goal, but there's also air curtain burners. So it generally starts off with a solid waste processing permit, and that's the basic required permit. But then depending on the operations that you do, like if you did air curtain burner, then you would need to get an air permit. If you did composting, then there's a separate composting permit. So again, we can provide you all that we could think of possible alternatives to take care of green waste, or we could just focus on composting.
No, just green. I think green waste, I mean, I believe there's companies out there who basically collect green waste. They have a big hole, they just dump it in there, and that's the end of it. Whereas you have other companies, I guess, that collect the green waste, grind it and do the necessary windrow and all that stuff, and then ultimately use it, repurpose. You know, so I'll be curious to see what those permitting criteria is.
We'll get it to you by next week, sir.
Great, thank you. Right, in Section 3 of the bill, it talks about the applicant must have, or the respondent, if you put out a solicitation for the collection of green waste or the disposal of green waste, that respondent must have a full-time certified compost manager. Does EPA, what would a certified compost manager look like?
I can't answer that at this point, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this then implies that something is going to have to be developed so that we can say you're certified, or you're qualified and you're not.
Yeah. So there are companies out there, or associations out there that do certify, you know, composting, certified landfills, et cetera, et cetera. We recognize that, sir, but we don't necessarily, at this point, make it a mandate. You know, Senator Jalco here has a composting permit. Maybe we should ask him.
Sure. There are regulatory agencies, or I should say associations and bodies that are part of these industries, you know, like a collection of people in this industry that come together and say, what are the best practices? How do you best achieve, you know, compost or whatever type of green waste management you're doing? So there are associations such as SWANA. SWANA is a very recognized body for solid waste management, both for composting, recyclables.
I understand, and so I guess what I'm getting at is that maybe, for example, what we have in Section 3 really kind of answers just half of the question. One is, in order to be deemed as being qualified, or this operation, you know, to meet qualification requirements, is that you must have a certified compost manager. But right now we don't have. I mean, yeah, we can go look on the internet with these organizations and see what their criteria is, but we don't have anything, you know, as opposed to language that says must have a full-time certified compost manager consistent with the criteria used in whatever. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, I wouldn't know a certified compost manager if I ran into one. And then, of course, the equipment. I like the idea that, and I think we also, of course, you know, I always see a legislation as something that's a work in progress, and this identifies what do we do after a typhoon. I'm not sure we have anything to address green waste in the interim or right now, other than that they have to go to EPA and they get permitted. I'm not sure what the criteria is.
I think
yeah,
Section
but to
2
procure the services of a qualified respondent, and so, you know, what determines who's qualified and who isn't. But also the idea was brought up about identifying collection sites, post-typhoon collection sites. Does anybody do we have a list of that already?
So we've identified some sites now, as indicated by Dr. Campbell. FEMA is having very strict requirements on these sites. They want sites that have concrete foundations, power and infrastructure hooked up to these foundations and secured by fence line. And the added caveat is it cannot be used for any other reason or rhyme except for post-typhoon. So you may have a energized water, you know, infrastructure built foundation that will sit there for months, maybe years, and we can't touch it according to FEMA guidelines, because it has to be on reserve for that. So we've identified the sites, and now we just need to, I guess the government needs to at some point figure out how to get it to the specs that FEMA is requiring at this point.
Okay. All right.
You know, Guam being a limited land resource, that's something that's could be difficult for Guam to maintain.
But these collection sites that have been identified, do they currently meet, you know, less the existence of a fence? Do they currently meet FEMA requirements such as the concrete base? And
not all of them at this point, sir.
Okay. Do you have a list of sites that do meet these?
We can provide you the list, but next week, sir.
Okay, could you that in addition to the criteria that is used to the application requirements to get a permit to operate a green waste site?
Duly noted.
Okay. I don't have any other questions, but I will say this. I think it will be a worthwhile expenditure of time to actually go and tour a well-run composting operation. And I've taken a look at, I've gone and I toured your place, and I think it's something that's well worth putting together to bring some of the senators out there to see what can be done, in fact. And maybe we'll do that. I know that we want to report this bill out the next session, but maybe it should be preceded by a tour to a green waste facility, and that may help decisions to be made.
You know, Senator Adder, I would encourage you to actually tour all permitted green waste facilities, so you can get a full idea of why some of the language in this bill is really relevant to what you're trying to achieve in the legislation. Like you referenced earlier, right? You just don't want it finding a hole in the ground. You want it to result in a actual recyclable material. So.
Okay, that's a good idea. Can you send me a list of the permitted green waste sites?
Yes, sir. We'll do that next week.
Okay, by middle of next week
Sure.
at the latest?
It's not going to be difficult for us to pull it up, sir.
Well, it's already 2 o'clock, so we'll wait till Monday.
Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so with that then, there being no further questions, we'll consider then Bill 83-34 as having been duly heard, and there being no further testimonies or questions, the Committee on Environment, Land, Agriculture, and Procurement Reform stands in recess until 6 p.m. tonight. Thank you.